Hello and welcome. My name is Nate Malinowski. I'm the Executive Director at Lighthouse Works. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Fisher's Island Library. Tonight's program is presented as an ongoing partnership between Lighthouse Works and the Fisher's Island Library, part of an ongoing collaboration that connects contemporary voices and distinguished voices in contemporary literature to the island.
Suddenly I'm panicking. I'm like, oh boy, wait till they hear the inappropriate thing I'm going to read.
This evening, we are honored to welcome Samantha Hunt, who will read from her national best-selling novel, The Seas, and will be joined in conversation by author, Islander Library board member, most importantly, my wife, Anna Noyes. I'm going to turn this over to Anna, but before I do, I wanted to thank the library for their willingness to be part of this ongoing partnership, making space for us to do this inside of the library, and also making space on the library shelves for the books from the authors who have been through our program. We're really just over the moon and appreciative of your recognition of their work, so thank you very much. I'm going to read just professional bios and then turn it over to Anna for a much more appropriate introduction. But Samantha Hunt is the author of 5 books: The Seas, about a girl who might be a mermaid; The Dark Dark, a collection of short fictions; Mr. Splitfoot, a ghost story; The Invention of Everything Else, about inventor Nikola Tesla; and most recently, The Unwritten Book, a nonfiction investigation into our relationship with the dead. Hunt is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Bard Fiction Prize, the National Book Foundation's 535 Prize, the St. Francis College Literary Prize, and a Blue Ribbon winner of the Montgomery Place Apple Pie Contest.
That's real. That's real.
Is that for making or eating the pie?
I should get it for eating, but I actually baked it.
Hunt adapted her story, The Yellow, into a short film that became an official selection at the Toronto International Film Fest. She was a finalist for the Orange Prize and the Penn Faulkner Prize. Hunt is a mother of 3, and a sister to 5. She is a gardener and a singer. She's joined tonight by Anna Noyes. Anna Noyes' debut novel, The Blue Maiden, was a New York Times Editor's Choice, Big Other Book Award, and Indie's Book of the Year finalist, the IPPY Bronze Medalist in Literary Fiction. Her short story collection, Goodnight Beautiful Women, was the finalist for the Story Prize and the New England Book Awards, as well as a New York Times Editor's Choice, Indie's Next Pick, and Barnes Noble Discover Great New Writers Selection. She holds an MFA from the Iowa's Writers Workshop. Her writing has appeared in Vice, Public Space, Lit Hub, Electric Literature, Bon Appetit, and Guernica, and is forthcoming in an anthology, Notes to New Mothers, which will be published by W.W. Norton. She has received the Lotus Foundation Prize, the Henfield Prize, and fellowships from McDowell, Yaddo, Lighthouse Works, and the James Merrill House. She lives in New York on Fisher's Island.
I'm truly so happy to see you all here tonight. It feels really important that we're all here together. And before I get into it, I want to add that tomorrow at 3 p.m., the library will be hosting an altered book art workshop with Sarah Upson, turning discarded books into unique upcycled art pieces using collage, paint, stamping, and cutting. And then on Tuesday, August 5th, we'll welcome Chef Jeff? I'm like, I want to say Geoff so badly, but Nate assures me that's not a word, but I feel like it's, okay, Chef Jeff, Tracy, and then author Roberta Downs will be here on August 6th. So please check those out. They're surely going to be interesting. Now, it is an honor of my lifetime to introduce Samantha Hunt to you tonight. I'm already going to cry. I'm undone by this. She is one of a small, sacred number of authors whose work feels to me like an essential nutrient, a part of my blood and bones and brain, necessary for growth and becoming. Here is some of what I discover in her pages. She listens closely to the complex stories of women and girls. She believes them, us, respecting her characters' deep, wild, imaginative interiors and desires. Each sentence and word choice surprises. Her presence imbues the language. All elements, including her story's silences, seem cared for. Her books are immersive as dreams, and I wake from them to a world more vivid, slightly altered in its potentials. Most of all, as her writing explores the strange or frightening, it is steeped in generosity of spirit, a kindness and love of life in all its dimensions, the dark and the light. I think often of a story Samantha tells about herself at age 17, living alone inside a geodesic dome on an isolated Vermont mountaintop. One middle of the night, terrified of the surrounding darkness, there was nothing to do but walk out into it, vulnerable, and wait for the lurking danger to show its face. Eventually, the fear went away, and what she found was a starlit night, as she says, terrifically peaceful and gorgeous. Here is a brave, curious being, willing to stand in the dark, to open herself to mystery and the unknown, to write it down for us. What a gift. One final thing. Last night, after a dip in the seas off of Isabella, driving home from dinner at the Pequot, where Samantha braved the light-up dance floor.
Amazing. Amazing.
My toddler daughter, Isla, said from the back seat, "I love how she danced with me." And then sternly, as if corrective, "Her voice is not so silly." "What is her voice?" we asked. She said, "Her voice is sweet."
Oh.
Please join me in welcoming Samantha Hunt.
Oh, boy. Oh my goodness. I don't know. An introduction has never made me cry too. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me here. It is just such an honor, and I'm so happy to be with you all here tonight and having me on this amazing island. It's just been incredible. I'm welcoming my whole family. Anna and Nate are like the most amazing hosts. This was my first book, but it seemed appropriate to read from a book that's about the ocean and about a young woman who thinks she's a mermaid to this community. So in some ways, I'm embarrassed to read it to you because it's over 20 years old. But okay, first of all, I love practicing humiliation. And that's like the karaoke, the singing thing, because I'm like, it's a way that we can demonstrate, like, I'm alive now. I'm going to die one day. Love me as I am, right? So humiliation, like with the humus that's in there, mortification with the mort that's in there, right? So I'm happy to read this older book to you. And I also really think oftentimes about Ursula K. Le Guin's carry your bag theory of fiction. Many of you are nodding your head who know that wonderful text. Even if you're not a fiction writer, I recommend it. It's a beautiful text about moving away from an idea about narrative as the hunter's arrow, the hero's solitary journey. You know, that's a path that we know that it starts with this arrow and it ends in death. She instead creates a model that's about that the real first tool, which is the purse, right? Collecting the seeds, putting that in, and all the many stories that are in there. And so with that sort of heart of generosity that Le Guin is trying to teach me, I'm like revisiting myself in reading this 20-year-old book to you and trying to find mercy for the young woman who wrote it and trying to love her as much as, oh shoot, there's a sign from the universe to shut up and start reading. Get on with it, girl. Okay, I will. I'll get on with it. I'm just going to read you a short selection from it, and all you really need to know, it's a young woman who's growing up and thinks she might be a mermaid. Her father has disappeared many years before he walked into the ocean. She thinks it's because there are mer people. Other people think it's because he's an alcoholic who killed himself. She's in love with a much older man. He's an Iraq war veteran. They're very good friends. And they have this very strange relationship because there's many years between them. But she's really obsessed in a way that is, you feel for her. And I love teenage girls. I love thinking about that obsession. I really admire that sort of loyalty. Okay, I'm going to start reading, I swear. It starts with an epigraph. It was a dark and stormy night, and the ship was on the sea. The captain said, "Sailor, tell us a story." And the sailor began. It was a dark and stormy night, and the ship was on the sea. The map, a prologue. The highway only goes south from here. That's how far north we live. There aren't many roads out of town, which explains why so few people ever leave. Things that are unfamiliar are a long way off, and there's no direct route to these things. Rather, it's a street, to a road across a causeway, to a road across a bridge, to a road to another road before you reach the highway. If you were to try to leave, people who have known you since the day you were born would recognize your car and see you leaving. They'd wonder where you're going, and they'd wave with 2 fingers off the steering wheel. A wave that might seem like a stop sign or a warning to someone trying to forget this very small town. It would be much easier to stay. The town is built up on a steep and rocky coast so that the weathered houses are stacked like shingles or like the rows of razor wire in a prison, one on top of the other up the hill. Small paths and narrow roads wind their ways between the houses so that there's no privacy in this town. If you were to stumble home drunk one night, by morning the entire town would know. Not that they would care. People here are accustomed to drunks. We have the highest rate of alcoholism in the country, and this fact is repeated so often, I thought we should put it on the Chamber of Commerce sign at the town line that welcomes tourists. More alcoholics per capita. Enjoy your visit. Most of the waterfront is cluttered with moorings, piers that smell of motor oil, and outbuildings for the fishermen, though there is a short stretch of sandy beach and a boardwalk where every summer a few fool tourists fail to enjoy themselves and spend their vacations wondering why anyone would live here. If they asked me, I'd tell them, we live here because we hate the rest of you. Though that isn't always true, it is sometimes. Then there's the ocean, mean and beautiful. Unabridged. She lives with her mother and her grandfather. Her grandfather is a former typesetter, and he likes to set dictionaries for fun. Unabridged. I'm not from here, am I? I ask my mother while she tightens the strap of her bathrobe. I don't want to be from here because most of the people in this town think of me as a mold or a dangerous fungus that might infect their basements. I am the town's bad seed. I am their rotten heart. My mother cracks her robe open so I can see the loose elastic of her pink underwear and her belly button. It's popped and spread as a manhole. Look at that, she says, and points to her stretched stomach as evidence. That's where you're from 19 years ago, she says. Dad said I came from the water. Well, that certainly would be unusual. My mother is regularly torn between being herself and being my mother. Her internal argument is sometimes visible from the outside, as if she had 2 heads sprouting from her one neck. The heads bicker like sisters. One says, be sensible for your daughter's sake. 3 meals a day. Brush teeth at night. Organize. Comet. Pledge. Joy. While the other head says nothing. The other head is reading a book about whether life exists outside our solar system. The cat plucks the screen. Dad said I'm a mermaid. But mermaids don't have legs, or a voice, or a soul, unless they marry a mortal, my mother says. My mother listens to my voice. My mother looks at my legs. You don't even have a husband. Ma! I'm annoyed because she's pointing out many of the very same things I've already heard. They rub a raw spot. I see. She rocks her back against the kitchen counter. But I don't see so well, Ma, and I think my trouble seeing might be a characteristic of the depth of the sea where I'm from. It's a region so dark blue, the creatures from that depth have no pigment, and neither do their eyes, like me. I look away from them, out the door. There's some creatures down there who don't have any eyes at all. My grandfather stops stirring the sugar. I've got a word for that place. He wheels his office chair over to the windowsill where he keeps one of many dictionaries. He throws the book open on the table. It makes a good thud. He leaps through the pages very quickly. I can almost remember the word, he says. It starts with had or ha. I read it in the Scientific American a few years ago, and I looked it up at the time. He tears through the dictionary, searching for a word that means noun. A region of the deep sea so dark that the creatures who dwell there have little or no pigment. It was here, he says. Someone took it. And he looks at my mother and me with suspicion, but mostly me. I try not to meet his gaze, but he's a tough old man, my father's father, and he can stare at me for a long time. Eventually, I have to look away. I walk over to the screen door and I let the kitty cat inside. I was thirsty. That word was just floating there. And anyway, that word's mine. The Scientific American. The first day that I met Jude, I was wading in the ocean. This was a long time before he joined the Army. Maybe I was 12 or 13 at the time. When I looked up, Jude was swimming near the shore. He looked like a horse, a seahorse. There he is, I thought, and I meant my father, because I'd been waiting for my dad to come back. And then I had a thought. I'm very interested in science, and I had heard about 2 different theoretical experiments and that seemed to demonstrate similar properties. The first was that if a bunch of monkeys were locked in a room with a typewriter, eventually they'd produce the entire works of William Shakespeare. This sounded like an excellent experiment to me. It made me want to be a scientist. The second experiment I heard of was that in quantum physics, the possibility exists that one day the molecules of a body could arrange themselves just so that the person would be able to pass through a wall that appears solid to the eye. That's how much room we have between our molecules. I thought of that, and then I thought, well, this is the place where all my father's molecules went. Then Jude was coming out of the water, and I thought, in quantum physics, maybe there must be a possibility that all the molecules of my father would find each other again and would walk out of the water looking at least a little bit like him. But Jude, he didn't walk out of the water. He stayed there for a long time, and he must have been freezing because the ocean this far north is rarely suited for swimming, though some children do. But this man didn't look like a child. Tall and dark, he looked like my father. There, at that moment, I started loving Jude. "Hello," I yelled to him. He turned towards me and looked a long time, shook his head, and waved. "What are you doing?" "Looking for something," he said. "Me too." "Me too," I said. But the waves were very loud between us. Finally, Jude walked toward me. His lips were turning blue like a drowned man's. This far north, horrible things happen all the time to young girls. But I wasn't afraid of him. He seemed sad, so kinder in his sadness. "You look like you've been in the water forever," I said. He stood where the waves began to break, where what was blue became white, a sheet of paper roiling with all that had been written there. Jude kept walking toward me. My name is Jude. So I saw he was not my father, but barely. "How come I don't know you?" I asked. "The town is small enough. Everybody knows everybody else." We watched the water between us. "You do now." The water rushed back out to sea, and the ocean filled up with words like Jude was bleeding all the things he couldn't tell anyone because it might kill him. The rest of the story. Now some nights, I want Jude so badly. I imagine I am giving birth to him. I pretend to sweat. I toss and wring my insides out. Mostly I think this because that's how badly I want Jude's head between my legs. It never occurs to me that I imagine he's my baby because loving him hurts, or because with the way he drinks he acts like one. I never think that. Instead, I think I will create Jude inside my head. And that way he will be inside of me, which is almost as good as fucking, or at least pricking our fingers and touching them together. Kingdom. Sometimes I spend dusk driving around town. Dusk is depressing, and I feel the only way I can get warm at dusk is with the car heater blowing directly on me, or if I take a hot bath. But if I take too many baths in one day, my mother will become nervous. She'll imagine I'm doing secret things in the bathtub, things like masturbating or killing myself. Even if Jude's not with me, I talk to him. I pretend he is in love with me. I'll be cheap Jude, I tell him when he's not there. He meets women employed by the ironworks, or he meets girls on the street, in the mini-marts, or they just get into his car if he looks at them. I suppose he is that handsome. That could actually happen. He doesn't always tell me. Sometimes I find their clothes, sometimes I find their pictures. Sometimes in the pictures, they're smiling at Jude. I look until I think I will be sick, or until he finds me and says, "Oh, come on. What are you looking at that for? Come on. I got you something today." And he'll smile. "Come here." And he'll lead me out to his back concrete stoop and point down into a plastic bucket sitting there. "It's a baby," he'll say. And it is. A tiny baby sea urchin the size of a quarter, covered everywhere with black spines. It's hard to believe that something that small is alive. "That's adorable," I say, and Jude blushes. "Thanks," I say, and I kiss his cheek with my dry lips. I carry my baby home in a bucket. I try to meet other men, but it doesn't work for me. I get in my car and drive out to the ironworks, but the men change shifts. They look at me sideways because I have always been an outcast here. That's what happens to children who lose a parent. They think I'm weird, or special, or unlucky, or just too sad a puddle for them to dip their toes into. So the men at the ironworks look at me, and even if they notice I've come of age, they still get into their own cars and go home. I linger long at stop signs in town, but no one ever gets into my car, even though all the doors are unlocked. I develop a plan to make Jude jealous. But in order to go through with the plan, I have to call a man named Neil. I know him not very well, though. Jude knows him, too, because the man is the same age as Jude, and sometimes they work for the same captains. That's part of my plan. The man and I decide to have dinner together and hear some music in a town an hour west of here. He doesn't want to go out in our town. I drive, and after dinner, when I return from the ladies' room, he says, "Pay the tip." So I do, and I thank him for dinner. "I'm not taking you out," he says. "You still owe me half." This man Neil is an ugly man, and as the evening passes, I begin to see how he enjoys humiliating me. He spends the entire evening talking about a girlfriend he once had from California. When I say, "Oh, the Pacific," he looks at me crossways. "You're a real nut job. Has anyone ever told you that?" I don't like this man. His thick lips make me feel sick inside, but I have a plan, so I go through with it. And later that night, the man Neil says, "I like a lot of talk while we're doing it." I think of all the unleashed dogs on the street. Their conversations in howl. "So that's what a 19-year-old feels like," he says. And I try to imagine the dark words he'll use to describe this to the sailors he works with, to Jude. Still later, the ceiling in his bedroom, the hair on the man's back. Jude is very mad about the man. He says he doesn't want to see me. I say I'm having trouble seeing him too. I have to go to the eye doctor again, I tell him, but he's already hung up the phone. A number of weeks pass. I don't see Jude. I work a few days at the sardine factory and a few days as a chambermaid. I spend one day watching a square patch of sunlight travel all the way across my room. I am in misery. Without Jude, I have nothing to do. Finally, the eye doctor returns. At his office, a small albino boy waits in the front room. He doesn't read a magazine, so I assume that his pink eyes are blind, and I stare at him with no regard for manners. Eventually he says, "I can see you, you jerk." "Sorry," I tell him, but the boy won't talk to me. The doctor calls me in. He asks, "What do you see?" with his hand over one of my eyes. "Jude." Now the other. "Jude." "I see. Not much change. Well, at least it's slow moving." I think of the patch of sunlight. "We'll keep an eye on it," he says. I drive to Jude's, but I don't go inside. Instead, I look at myself in the rearview mirror, looking for whatever it is that deforms me to unlovable. Slimes, freckles, a tail. I stare and stare. I ruminate, as my mother would say, to the point of destruction, thinking so hard that it feels like drilling. Indeed, I often imagine I'm performing a dissection on myself so that I could better understand what's going on inside of me, but I'm too scared to go through with it. Instead, I stare in the rear view. Eventually, so after so much staring, I say, "I can see you, you jerk." I park and I walk down to the water. I walk along the shore a long, good distance. There are no people on the beach this far from town. I can be all alone and away from my bad decisions. I think of the man Neil, and I find it impossible to believe that I let him inside of me. I think of Jude, and I worry that all the mermaid stories are true, that if he won't love me, either he'll have to die or else I will. I think of my father, and I stop walking. I take all three of them, the hairy man, Jude, and my father. I ball them up and toss them over my shoulder. I keep walking away from them. And for a minute, I even run along the shore feeling light and lifted. I put one hand on my hip, one hand on the back of my head like a pinup girl from the 1950s calendar. I swish my hips, woo woo, very sexy. After some deliberations, I decide to leap. It feels wonderful, but halfway through the leap, I get scared. I see something squirming up ahead, and I immediately long to be back on the sand. I abort my leap. I fall back to the ground. There's a creature flapping like a fish without air, only it's far larger than any fish. I run to find out what the thing is, and as I approach, I can see it's not really a fish. It's King Neptune on the shore. He's hurt. He's squirming, trying to get back into the ocean. I'm scared, but I ask him, "King, you want me to throw you back?" "Oh dear," he says, "if you could." I edge up to him slowly. I don't want to alarm him any further. I'm surprised that someone as powerful as King Neptune could be hung up on something as shifting and dirty as a beach. "What happened?" I ask, while I'm trying to lift his back. "It's embarrassing," he says. "Well, you don't have to say if you don't want to. You're the king of the ocean." He's a tremendous creature, like a whale. He's so large I could be crushed if a wave rolled him onto me. I'm getting quite wet in my efforts to assist the king. "No, it's all right. I'll tell you," he says. Broken heart. King Neptune uses his arms to push towards the water. "There was a young girl," he says, "here on the beach. I wanted to get closer to her, but as soon as I came into the shallow water, she stood up and ran away." "I'm sorry, that's sad," I say. I don't really think it's that sad. I wonder what an old man was doing chasing a young girl, but I don't say anything. "Do you know my father?" I ask him. "What, a sailor?" "Yes." "Sorry," he says. "No, it's not your fault." And King Neptune smiles like God. Like 97% of the world's water is in the ocean. Like 75% of the world's covered with ocean. Like everything is his fault. "What about Jude? Do you know him? He's down here a lot," I say. "Yeah, I think so. He's friends with that girl who lost her mind, the one who thinks she's a mermaid." I stop helping King Neptune get back into the water. I stand back from him, and while he continues talking, "What I can't figure out," he says, "is why she'd want to be a mermaid. All mermaids do is swim around and kill sailors. It's not a great job." I stop helping him, and when I start again, I push hard. "I'm going to be a different kind of mermaid," I tell the king. He turns and looks at me. His eyes are just as pale as mine. "You don't get a choice," he says. "There's only one kind of mermaid," he says, and then, Don't forget that the ocean is full of everything except mercy. I shove his back so that he'll be awkwardly forced to bend at the hips. He's an old man, and I'm certain that he won't have the flexibility in his bones, that it will hurt him. I push so hard that the vertebrae in his back cut me. Fuck King Neptune, I think. Growing up as a mermaid was a hard way to grow. When I was younger, other children would not befriend me, but instead they'd say loud enough for me to hear, that house is rotten in and out. That girl's got bugs in her hair. I'd fake to pick a bug from my scalp and eat it. Delicious. When I was younger, I'd go down to the water and each wave would ask me in a thug accent, you want I should take care of those kids? You want I should tell your father? But I'd let the children live. See, I have mercy. I push and push King Neptune, and then I give up. And then I can see clearly. King Neptune isn't, and underneath my cut hands is a rock shaped like a king. A rock deposited on this beach when the Ice Age flowed home, beaten in retreat. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, that was a weird book.
No, it's gorgeous.
It gets even weirder.
I have a quote of yours that I love that's right before the question I was going to ask, and I just want to read it because I feel like it speaks to that last moment. You say, whether or not she's factually a mermaid matters less to me than her truthful reasons for needing to be one. I won't separate her from her imagination, which I think is like, you're so faithful to her. It makes me, it's a real honor to the story and to the character.
Well, I think about that a lot, like the idea that, I mean, it's funny, I happen to be married to a journalist, and so there's a nonfiction fiction tension in the house. It's not really a tension, but there's, you know, that idea that fiction isn't telling the truth has always been so weird to me, because I think every idea, every material thing we know started life as an idea. Like, why don't we think that fiction is real? It's very real. And so, I mean, especially with my relationship with my own teenageness and my 3 daughters, you know, the notion that what they imagine isn't real annoys me very much. I find that horrible. I mean, not just girls, all of us, right? That what we imagine, of course, creates an outcome. And so it's very important what we imagine, you know. It's very important to not imagine horrible things. I really think so.
Yeah. I feel like her voice is so strong to me, and I wonder how that came to you, sort of the genesis of the book, but the genesis, if it began with her voice, if there was a kind of channeling, or, you know, elsewhere I've read that you, in some books, like 85% of your work is revision. Yeah. And so I also am curious if the path to that voice is more iterative, working with the language, kind of discovering and honing in on a quality.
That's a good question. I think with this case, certainly her voice was there from the beginning.
That's what it feels like to me. And so I was...
Yeah, she was definitely, she felt very clear to me from the beginning, and I could see who she was. I could see who she was perfectly. I mean, there's one weird thing about this young woman who, it's her narrative, is she never gets a name. And it was partly I couldn't do it. Like I would try, but I really couldn't do it because it felt like this is a book about identity. You know, we have her grandfather who's trying to define everything, his obsession with the dictionary. We have a small town that's trying to tell her, no, you're crazy. No, you're this, you're that, you know, all these words that the small town is trying to tell her that she is. And so for me to give her a name felt like I was doing the same thing. And so I was like, okay, I need to let her just be all of the things that she might possibly be. Mermaid, not mermaid. I mean, I know some people with this book are like, well, what happens at the end? Well, I'm not gonna, we shouldn't even go there, but yeah. But I'm like, everything, everything, whatever you think happened. Yeah.
It's interesting to me too, because like the sense is maybe that she is delusional, and yet in their way, everyone who surrounds her is delusional in their own particularities. Like her grandfather believes the words are being stolen from his dictionary. Her mother, who feels very grounded in certain ways is waiting for this father figure to come back and grieving and watching for him. So everyone kind of has their different frequencies, but are still kind of shaping the world in their own, projection and desire.
And she enjoys pointing it out to them too, because they're all telling her she's nuts. And she's kind of like, okay, but so you are, so she likes to point out how everybody is a captive of their own, imagining.
I was curious, there's a tension in the book for me of sort of ancient storytelling structures. As Maggie Nelson writes in her introduction of the book, it's timeless and archetypal, a tale of love and war. And if you really look at what she believes in and the sort of trajectory of her thoughts about being, it feels very ancient and mythical and actually aligned with a lot of old mythologies. You allude to the Undine in your work, which is a German figure, mermaid-like figure, and shares some visual imagery and, sort of resonance with your text. And so I'm kind of curious, I felt throughout this kind of pull between what might be very acceptable in the ancient storytelling structure and this modern world and sort of modern logic. And I wondered if that was a tension for you as you wrote the book as well. Just the blending of the two. And if you actually were relying on texts or, source images, or if it was more just your urge to tell the truth using these
Thank you.
visuals.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the impetus of the book came out of Hans Christian Andersen, Little Mermaid, and Undine, and all manner of collecting mermaid myths, and as a young woman, being troubled by the idea that I swim all the time. I swim in all seasons. I love to swim, and being troubled by the idea of I'm a mermaid, and many of us, male and female, feel that we're mermaids, right? We associate ourselves with the mer people, I think, and it's a peaceful image, I think, for many of us to feel that connection. But then when we look at what the myth actually is, I mean, at least from the female side, it's terrible. They're killers of men, and also sexy creatures without genitals. I'm that's okay. That's really weird, but okay. The hatred that's involved in that, right, that comes up. And so I was troubled when I was writing this with that idea of the mermaid myth. And so I wanted those to be very present. At the same time, I wanted it to be a contemporary story. And so Jude is based on a friend of mine who went to Iraq and came back and, of course, was altered by his experience in the war. And so I also wanted to tell his story and what it meant for him to suffer under archetypal stories, right, of having to be a warrior, because he doesn't do very well in that role. And so both of the two main characters are really kind of struggling under the power of these archetypes that are help to explain them, help to explain the world to them, but at the same time are quite damaging, I think.
Yeah. I'm really curious, the voice is so steeped in our narrator for the first maybe 3/4 of the book. And then, but as you say, it's it's a love story that's shared between her and Jude. And this is something I've grappled with in my own work and is a piece of craft advice that I came across at a certain point and kind of wrestled with, that the object of obsession, the mystery, the kind of removed thing, you don't want to let them too far in because it kind of breaks that sense of mystery. And I was in the Unwritten book, your book of essays, you quote Anne Carson on Eros saying, Eros is hungry, organized around a radiant absence, Eros as lack. And you write desire as lack rather than love, a hole unfilled, which I think for much of the book, Jude functions that way, sort of this hole unfilled. And he's magnetic, although you could argue other characters in the book are kind of the magnetic heart of the book. But I wondered at that moment when you decide to, there's a moment where you shift and let Jude speak. He tells his story, he writes a letter. It was really striking to me and really powerful, but also where, he's getting to speak. And so I wonder if it surprised you, if you came to that initially, or sort of were like, I need to let him talk.
Yeah.
And also like, he's kind of an absence even once he articulates himself, he's articulating like, I'm a whole, you know?
Yeah.
And so that I just think is an interesting way.
I mean, he's kind of been telling her that he's a whole the whole time. Like, stay away from me. I'm a whole. You don't want to come here. There's nothing here. He does. He honestly tells her that the whole time. But I did have to finally let him speak. And I was writing this book very much under the influence of Anne Carson and her ideas about Eros. And like, you know, for the first 3 quarters, yes, like this teenager, she can keep any vision of love aloft. I mean, she's like, okay, fine, deny, imagine, he loves me, you know, in the wonderful way that teenagers have of making their own reality, right? And so that does come crashing down. You know, Jude finally speaks and she's like, oh, you're a whole, you know, in some way, right? You truly are. She's very sympathetic towards him, but So yeah, I did want, you know, that myth of perfect love to kind of be smashed a little bit there. I wanted her to come into her own awareness of herself, which I think she does. I hope she does at the end. And so letting Jude speak was very important. And also his narrative, he tells the story of what happened to him in Iraq, and it's devastating. You kind of realize, oh yeah, a person can't just kind of go off and do that and come back unchanged or come back not devastated, you know, which was a super important part of the narrative that I wanted to tell here.
I want to ask just one more question on the seas, and then a few more on you, and then I'll keep it brief, and then we can open it to audience Q&A, because I know. I read a posting of yours where you were talking about the anniversary of the seas, and you said a man, you know, adamantly came up to you and said, I know this is my hometown in Alaska, you know, and you were like, phew, I've never been to Alaska. He didn't find me. But I'm from like rural Maine, and I had the same exact reaction to the text, like the 2-fingered wave. How does she know that? You know, it's like so specific to even parts of Fishers, I feel like resonate with this text. And so I was curious just how you approach place in this book, and if like geographical specificity and detail, you know, mattered to you, or if there's sort of if you were driving after a sense of like, this place is every place, this is your place. It's a almost like a psychic or emotional place as well, with the kind of like, you know, the place that you love, but can't leave and can't escape, and the sense of being watched. And, you know, it almost feels like born from their interiority. But
I definitely think that a lot of the shore communities have similarities. And so I never wanted to, I mean, there is a town that I think this is, but I don't want to say what it is because of that man from Alaska saying that. I've literally never even been to Alaska. So when he came up to me, I mean, and there's characters in here that are based on actual people. So when he was like, I know where this is, I was like, oh no, I've been revealed, you know. And then he was like, so-and-so Alaska. And I was like, yeah, okay. But so that idea that it could be any town. I mean, I'm really interested with the idea of, especially like oceanside towns' relationship with death, with the ocean, with the idea of mercy, with the idea of alcoholism, like all of the spirited liquids that are rampant usually in seaside towns. And so I wanted it to really be anywhere. And so like her, the town is never named. It doesn't get a name either. And, you know, all we really know, it's a Northern Ocean town, which hopefully could be anywhere.
It's Maine. I feel it. Everybody had it.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Yes, of course it is. Yeah.
Sort of shifting to your broader work. I'm curious. So one of the most like poignant parts of your book, The Unwritten Book, you tell of your grandmother and great grandmother, both of whom lost their children. And didn't really speak about that loss at all. And your great grandmother, I believe it was, like actually literally lost her voice
when her
spoke
child
in a
died.
whisper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She never spoke again. Above a whisper.
Yeah. And so, and then you also tell about your great aunt who died in a sanitarium in her early 20s. Yeah. And her sisters also never really spoke of her life or death.
They wrote about her as if she died when she was a child.
Right. It was
and
like
she died
a poor
at 23
child,
in an
institution.
Child. And Iowa.
Yeah. And so I guess I wonder, I've read a bit of your writing process that you speak it out loud, like over and over and over again. And I also think your work like so beautifully articulates pain and grief and darkness and like all of these things that in prior generations women would be punished for speaking, or, what are those, you say something like, what are the true horrors that like kept these women from talking about their sister, the strictures of their time. And so I guess I can't help but think of like, you're such a voice in comparison to their silence. And you said like, I don't claim to speak for the dead, but I am curious if you're sort of thinking of what they could not say and what you can, if that's like a tension that exists in your...
It's not even a tension, it's a joy that I feel like I can speak for these women. I mean, they're all dead. I knew just my grandmother in that situation. I never knew my great, because I'm the youngest of 6, and so that side of the family was a lot older than me. And so it feels like a joy to try to recreate, and especially my great aunt Ella, who died in the sanitarium, because honestly, such shame, such suppression of that story, that one sister and it took so long. And luckily, the way that I got access to the information was during the pandemic, just writing the mental institution where she died, and the papers still existed. I mean, the admitting doctor, and she was admitted because she boarded a train for Council Bluffs. She wanted to get the hell out of there. And that's why she was sent to a mental institution. I know. And so to read this account, and it's also just kind of creepy because it's written in, this like beautiful, 1883 script. It's just gorgeous. And you're reading this account of just horror where the doctor thinks that he's doing this. And so, I mean, and that's, gosh, you guys, I mean, anytime we're dealing with history, like each time we reactivate it, that there's a joy in that release, right? There's a joy in like examining what that history can mean to us now, right? I mean, that's the whole point of having these memories, right? It's like, how can we continue to understand that history afresh each time? And so, hopefully someday, 200 years hence, somebody's saying, let's look at the history of the Fisher Island Library, right? And like what it can mean to them then, right? It's so, yeah, I'd say it's a joy. It's terribly sad, but it makes it less sad, I think, when we go back and we reactivate those kind of histories and get to speak for the dead.
Yeah. Speaking like for and with the dead is something that it appears in a lot of your books, channeling your possession.
Yes.
And I guess I'm curious also, you could be you're described as like a Gothic or maybe even ghost story writer. I wouldn't maybe say horror writer, but I would, but I define it very loosely. But I'm curious, a lot of your horror, like as you're sort of speaking to this event, using that word, exists in the everyday.
Sure.
You have an amazing quote of like how children just sort of find Gothic in the everyday and are like scared of death all the time. And it's very
trying
immediate.
to understand it all the time.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I guess I'm curious, your work seems so singular to me in that you're not like putting the fearful thing into like another, a villain, but it sort of infuses the world in a way. And as well as a lot of like joy, sort of attendant right alongside it. And I'm wondering, do you think of your work in terms of like wanting it to be frightening, wanting it to be any kind of specific genre, or are you more just kind of like observing the world very closely and what it means to live in a girl or woman's body then, now, and then that has its own inherent darkness.
Yes.
Haunting.
Yes, all of the above. Yes.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I want to say about that is when Mr. Splitfoot was nominated for a horror prize, I was absolutely shocked because I was like, that's a romance, I was like, so I might not be the best judge of my work, but I mean, the two certainly go hand in hand in my thinking. And one thinker, one writer who I'm very inspired by is James Baldwin, and he writes about the destruction that our fear of death wreaks upon us. He says we will we will discard all the joy, all the beauty of our life to align ourselves in teams and tribes and races, and we'll fight wars to deny the fact of death. And when it's the only fact we have, he asks us to celebrate it. And I think about that line all the time. And I think about what our fear of death really has done to us. And I'm not talking about like the death of children. That is wrong. Should never happen to anybody. That is so against nature, of course. And I'm not talking about needless death, but the preservation of life, or the constant fear and anxiety that the idea of death puts in us. I go back to James Baldwin again and again, and I think, oh, what has our fear done to us to put us into these prisons? And so I'm glad that you've said the joy as well, because I feel like anytime I'm trying to examine death, I'm also trying to examine, like, yeah, that means that we get to be alive, though, too. I think it's in the unwritten book where I said to one of my sisters when she was pregnant, I was like, you just made a death. And she was like, shut up. She was so mad at me. And I was like, no, that's mighty. I was like, that's so powerful. That's amazing. I started imagining the Mother's Day card that was like, hey, you made death. Awesome. Like it should be like the strongest warrior on there,
I love the way, I don't have time to ask you about it, even though I want to ask you a million more questions, but I love the way you sort of recast motherhood and you say something like, motherhood, people tell these stories of like minivans and muffins and like whatever. And really you're like making death and life in your body. It's just something like very elemental and fierce and powerful. And so I think those stories rewritten like are really essential to, it's personal.
And so certainly, the darkness with the light. I don't want to, the book, The Dark, those aren't to me dark stories. It's kind of like that moment where you open your back door and you're like at night and you're like, there's something out there. And you're not like, oh, I'm going to lock the door, I'm scared. It's like, there's something out there and I'm going to go see. Or like, I want to just stand beside it. Right? That feeling. So it's weird that we have the idea of dark as something bad. We all love the dark. The dark is a safe place. The dark is sleep. The dark is like beautiful stars. That the antidote that was the big realization when I was living in that dome. I was like, what if I just go out there and I say, okay, psycho killer, now's your chance. If you're going to come kill me. And then he didn't. And I was like, it's actually beautiful. It's beautiful and peaceful out here. And so, and so I guess just breaking that binary is important to me.
Yeah, I feel it everywhere in your work. I think that's a great place to open it up to audience questions. If you have some, we have a few more minutes. And there's a mic that will be passed around to you by Nate. Yeah.
Anybody have a question? You can...
Oh, and you need my thingy. How futuristic and cool is this?
It is cool.
Sorry.
Clips right in. It's just for the recording. Does anyone have a question? I'm happy. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you need to make... Oh, God, I'm like subverting the rules immediately. I didn't mean to. I'm just forgetful.
You mentioned at one point that your writing is 85% revision.
Yeah.
How do you get to that number? Like, where do you start?
I kind of just use that when I'm talking to my students to encourage, because it really is. Like, it's so much in the working process that a lot of my stuff gets made. And for me, like, back to that Ursula K. Le Guin collector bag, like, I love finding connections that the universe presents to us. And so oftentimes when I'm creating a story, I'll take 3 things that I'm obsessed with at that moment and I'll force them into relation, and I'll be like, why are these things obsessing me? And so forcing myself to find the connection between things, oftentimes that really only becomes clear to me in revision, or from the moments that, like, you sit with a story long enough, you sit with a book long enough that the universe has time to work on it too. I don't know if you're a writer, but anything in life in general, like, you start thinking about something and suddenly, like, the world presents it to you. You're like, oh, elephants. And then there's like an elephant walking down there and you're like, what the heck is going on here, right? That I feel like I need that time of revision to find what those beautiful connections are. The moments that I don't really like the word magic at all. It feels like a cop-out for the natural world, because the natural world is magic, but I wouldn't call it magic because it's just the world we live in. We just get blind to it. And so finding those moments that illuminate that beauty. I love that. And that's a lot of what comes through in the revision. Yeah, so I didn't actually like come up with the number 85. It's just a guess about how much time, but I do spend a lot of time revising, even more the older I get. Yeah.
Okay, so now, based on that question,
Yeah.
and that you were talking about how you're rereading this book that wrote, does it make you want to revision?
Okay, so I lucked out a little bit with that so in 2017, it was out of print. It came out in 2004. Yeah, early 2000s, 2004, we're going to go with something like that. Yeah. And 2004 it was, I think, anyways, whatever. In 2007, it was out of print. It was a tiny little press in California that had gone away, sadly. The fellow who started it died. And Tin House Books brought it back in 2017. And so I was like looking through it and I was like, oh, you gotta let me change some of this. I was like, and they said, you can't change anything that happens, but if you need to kind of shine up the language in places. And now I look at it even like whatever, just 8 years later, and I'm like, oh, I need to shine it up a lot more. Can we go again? Like, yeah. I heard that Carolyn Shute, the Beans of Egypt made, like she did a total revision. She like every time that they reprint it, she's like, I'm gonna need to change some stuff. Yeah. So yeah, revision can be a danger if you want to keep on revising. And sometimes when I'm reading, I am like, ugh, clunky language, get that out of here. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I'm curious how you got started, and then how do you fit your writing practice into your life with a family and everything else going on?
That's a good question. I grew up like lots of books in my house. My dad was an editor. I also am the youngest of 6 kids, and I could never be a talker. It's funny because you probably are like, she will not shut up. But like in my own family, I was always like I had to do a lot of listening. But I think listening is like so good for becoming a writer, just being an eavesdropper, being a listener. So I would say I got started by being in a big family and just having an ear for the language, and reading like crazy. I read like crazy as a kid. I still love reading. I was like the kind of kid that I had to have a cereal box in front of me. Like I honestly couldn't be without text. I still am like that. I'm like, where's the text? It makes me nervous to not have text in front of me. And then the actual work. So for this book, and this is those of you folks here who are trying to write, this might be helpful. So when I was doing the C's, I had 2 jobs, day jobs, other jobs, trying to pay for grad school. And I would write very, very early in the morning. And I would only try to write these little tiny pieces. And I was basically started this book as an investigation of the color blue. I was like, oh, our blood, the sea, the sky is an oxygen-free place, kind of like a young girl in a small town, which I was at that moment. And I thought, oh, what does that have to do? What does the oxygen-free state have to do with trying to form identity? And so I would write these tiny little pieces that just investigated the color blue and this girl, this voice. And they were you could almost call them poems. They were so short. And I would do 1 or 2 before I'd go to work. And then when I had like 250 of these bricks, I just spread them out on the floor, and I was like a bricklayer. I was like adding the mortar to make it into a novel. But it's a good way to write a first novel because it doesn't feel overwhelming. You're like, I'm going to write a paragraph today and see. And they were standalone, which is partly, if you saw me reading, why I felt like I still feel like I can skip around in that book because I still feel the bricks separately. And I'm like, they can go in any order, change the order up, But so that's how I manage it. I still am devoted to the early morning writing hours. I know some of my colleagues love to do the late night hours, I don't know too many writers who are like, middle of the day is great for me. There's too many voices in the middle of the day to hear your own, maybe. Yeah, it's easier in the kind of quieter hours, I think. That's how I do it now. And I teach a lot too now. So I get to keep on reading. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Thanks, and thanks so much for being here. It's such a treat. I was wondering, you were talking a little bit earlier about, in the Seas, your character's sort of relationship with her like lived experience and her truth, and how that sort of was in dissonance with the people in her town, and I feel like that's a theme that comes up a lot in the Dark too, and sort of people's own experiences and how they don't necessarily line up with other people's perception of them. And I was curious about whether that was something you struggled with when writing your essay collection, and sort of like rectifying your own truth with other people's that you're writing about, if that's something that you were engaging with.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Nico. I do a lot. And in fact, I think part of the reason that I write more fiction is almost to hide, right? I can always be like, oh, that's a character, as if there's not, I just had this like long diatribe about all the truth in fiction, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when I was writing the Unwritten book as a work of nonfiction, and a lot of it has to do with my siblings, I did actually send it to all 5 of them before it came out. And I was like and my mom too, my mom is alive. And my mom had one change, and I write about the change that she made me. She made me take a word out of that book that she didn't want to be described as. And so I'm like the little jerk that I am. I was like, I wrote about her. I don't say the word ever, but I wrote about her making me take this word out. And she was fine with that change. She's funny. And my sister, all of my siblings were like, okay, go ahead. And one sister, the sister who I'm super closest with, the sister who helped me discover Ella's history, she's a great researcher. She said the most generous thing, and she said, well, that's not how I remember it, but I believe that's how you remember it. Yeah. And I was like, that's amazing. Yeah. And I don't know if you've read that book, she was the one who was in the car with me on that scary ride with my dad. Yeah. And she said, and she's like my hero. She saved my life. And she said she doesn't remember that, which I was like, okay, that's really weird to me. She also has a really bad memory, but I do too. Yeah. Right. Okay. Not for those things. So I did try to incorporate other people's truths into that. I really did, because it felt like if you're telling your family story, and maybe the book about Nikola Tesla is a good example, because that's a work of fiction, but nothing in there about his biography is made up. And in fact, I had to actually remove things that are from his biography, because I thought, his life was so extraordinary that I thought, it's gotten even more extraordinary, poor man. He's being disparaged left and right. Sorry. I guess I shouldn't get political here. Okay, I won't get political here. But I didn't want to make up anything about it. I wanted you to be able to read that work of fiction and actually feel like, oh, now I understand this interesting inventor. Now I know his biography. And so, that's a fun challenge, to write fiction that also incorporates a historical truth, right? Yeah. So there's 3 different examples. I hope that answers your question, Nico.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I think we're gonna wrap it there, even though I wish we could just sit here talking to you all night long.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you.